I stood in front of 200 people as my own mother looked me dead in the eye and said I wasn't her son. The church went silent. The priest froze mid-sermon. Every head turned toward me like I was some kind of liar, some desperate stranger trying to ruin a good woman's reputation. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a piece of paper I'd been carrying for 7 years. A paper that would end her lies forever. And when I handed it to the priest, everything changed. My name is Marcus, and this is the story of how my mother denied my existence in front of God and everyone she'd ever known, and how one document brought her entire world crashing down around her perfectly polished shoes. Let me take you back to that Sunday morning. It was September, one of those crisp autumn days when the light comes through stained glass windows and makes everything look holy. St. Catherine's Church was packed like it always was for the 10 o'clock service. Every pew filled with familiar faces, people who'd known each other for decades, who brought casseroles when someone died and showed up to every baptism and wedding. It was the kind of tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone's business, or at least they thought they did. I'd driven 3 hours to get there that morning. 3 hours of highway, of turning over in my mind whether I was really going to do this, whether I had the courage to finally confront the woman who'd spent my entire life pretending I didn't exist whenever it was convenient for her. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel the whole way. I'd rehearsed what I might say 1,000 times, but I knew that when the moment came, no amount of preparation would make it easier. I arrived just as the service was starting. I slipped into the back pew. Trying to be invisible, just wanted to see her first before I made my move. And there she was 4 rows from the front, sitting with her husband Richard and their 2 children, my half-siblings who barely knew I existed. She looked exactly like she always did. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect dress with a perfect little cardigan over her shoulders. She looked like everyone's ideal of what a good Christian woman should be. Devoted wife, loving mother, pillar of the community. The irony wasn't lost on me. Father Michael was deep into his sermon about family, about honoring your mother and father, about the sacred bonds that tie us together. I almost laughed out loud at the timing. It was like the universe had scripted this moment specifically for maximum impact. Every word he spoke felt like it was meant for her, for us, for this situation that was about to explode. I waited. I sat there in that back pew, feeling the weight of the envelope in my jacket pocket, feeling my heart pound so hard I thought everyone around me must be able to hear it. I watched the back of her head, that perfectly styled hair, and I remembered every single time she'd made me feel like I was nothing. Every birthday she missed. Every school play she didn't attend. Every time I called, and she pretended to be someone else. Every Christmas I spent alone while she posted pictures of her happy family online. A family that didn't include me. But it wasn't always like that. When I was really young, before Richard, before the perfect life she built, she was different. Not warm, exactly, but present. I was a secret she kept, but at least I was her secret. She'd visit me in my grandmother's house where I lived, bring me things, tell me she loved me in her own distant way. She'd say, "Not yet," whenever I asked why I couldn't live with her, why I couldn't call her mom in public, why I had to pretend to be my grandmother's son whenever anyone asked. Not yet. Always not yet. Then Richard came along. Richard with his construction company and his family money and his expectations of what his wife should be. Suddenly, there was no more not yet. There was just silence. Phone numbers that stopped working. Addresses that changed without notice. And then, eventually, the explicit instruction delivered through my grandmother. Tell Marcus to stop trying to contact me. Tell him I've moved on. Tell him to do the same. I was 14 years old. My grandmother, God rest her soul, never stopped trying to get my mother to acknowledge me. She'd call, she'd write letters, she'd show up at places she knew my mother would be. But my mother got good at avoidance. Really good. And when my grandmother died 3 years ago, I thought that was it. I thought I'd never get the closure I needed, never get the acknowledgement that I existed, that I mattered, that I was her son whether she wanted to admit it or not. But grief does strange things to people. After my grandmother's funeral, which my mother did not attend, I found myself unable to let it go. I couldn't accept that she'd just erased me from her history, from her life, like I was some mistake she could simply pretend never happened. So I started looking for her again. It wasn't hard in the age of social media. Within a week, I knew where she lived, where she went to church, where her kids went to school, what her perfect little life looked like from the outside. And I watched. Not in a creepy way. I wasn't stalking her or anything like that. But I look at her Facebook posts, her Instagram stories, all these snapshots of a life that looked so complete and happy. Family dinners, weekend trips, church activities, PDA meetings. She'd become exactly what she'd always wanted to be: respectable, established, normal. A woman with no past, no secrets, no son she'd given birth to at 17 and spent the next 32 years pretending didn't exist. I tried to reach out a few times over those 3 years. An email that went unanswered. A letter that was returned unopened. A phone call where she heard my voice and immediately hung up. Each rejection hurt less than the last. Not because I was healing, but because I was going numb. I was starting to accept that some people just don't want to be found, don't want to acknowledge their mistakes, don't want to disrupt the narrative they've built about themselves. But then something changed. About 6 months ago, I saw a post where she was talking about family values, about the importance of always telling the truth, about teaching her children to be honest and authentic. She'd shared some motivational quote about integrity being what you do when no one is watching. The comments were full of people praising her wisdom, calling her inspirational, saying she was such a good role model. And something inside me just snapped. The hypocrisy was too much. The disconnect between who she pretended to be and who she actually was became unbearable. I didn't want revenge exactly. I didn't want to hurt her for the sake of hurting her. But I wanted truth. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted her to stop lying to herself and everyone else. I wanted her to face what she'd done, who she'd abandoned, the son she'd denied. So I got my birth certificate, the original from the county records office, the one with her name on it, clear as day. Mother, Rebecca and Morrison. My name, Marcus James Morrison. Father, unknown. Date of birth, April 15th, 1992. It was all there, official and undeniable. I had it laminated, put it in an envelope, and carried it with me everywhere for months, waiting for the right moment, the right opportunity. And then I saw the post about the sermon on family. It was like a sign. Father Michael was going to preach about the sanctity of family bonds, about honoring your parents, about the unbreakable connection between mother and child. She commented on the church's Facebook event saying how much she was looking forward to it, how important these messages were in today's world. She'd even tagged her husband and kids. That's when I knew. That's when I decided. If she wanted to sit there in that church and nod along to a sermon about family while denying the existence of her own son, I was going to give her the opportunity to do it one last time. And then I was going to end it. So there I was, sitting in that back pew, waiting for my moment. Father Michael was building to the conclusion of his sermon, talking about how God sees all, knows all, how we can hide from people but never from the truth. The congregation was hanging on every word, nodding, saying amen at the appropriate moments. My mother was sitting there looking serene and attentive, the perfect picture of piety. That's when I stood up. The movement caught Father Michael's eye. He paused mid-sentence, looking at me with gentle confusion. I started walking down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. People turned to look. I could feel their eyes on me, could hear the whispers starting. Who is that? What's he doing? This isn't how we do things here. My mother turned around. Our eyes met, and in that split second, I saw recognition flood her face, followed immediately by panic, then something like rage. She knew. She knew exactly why I was there, what I was about to do. And she made her choice. She stood up before I could reach her row, turning to face the congregation, her voice loud and clear and certain. I don't know this man. I've never seen him before. He is not my son. Please, someone, I think he might be dangerous. The words hit me like a physical blow. Even though I'd expected it, even though I'd known she might deny me, hearing it said out loud, in front of all these people, with such conviction, such easy dishonesty, it took my breath away. The church erupted in murmurs. Several men started to stand, ready to escort me out. Father Michael held up his hand, trying to keep order. Ma'am, sir, please, let's all remain calm, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Young man, perhaps you've confused. I haven't confused anything, Father, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. My name is Marcus James Morrison. I'm 32 years old, and this woman is my mother, whether she wants to admit it or not. He's lying, my mother said, and I had to admire the performance. She sounded genuinely distressed, genuinely confused and frightened. If I didn't know better, I'd believe her too. I have no idea who this person is. He's clearly troubled. Please, someone call the police. Richard stood up beside her, putting a protective arm around her shoulders. You need to leave, he said to me, his voice hard. Now, before this gets worse for you. I looked at my half-siblings, teenagers who were staring at me with fear and confusion. They had no idea. They'd grown up thinking their mother's past started when she met their father. They didn't know about the teenage pregnancy, the son given to a grandmother to raise, the decades of denial and abandonment. They just saw some stranger disrupting their Sunday service, frightening their mother. This was the moment. This was why I'd come. Not to cause a scene, not to embarrass her for the sake of it, but to force the truth into the light, to make it impossible for her to keep lying. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope. Several people gasped, probably thinking I was reaching for a weapon. Father Michael took a step back, but I just held it up, let them see it was just paper, just a document. Father Michael, I said, my voice carrying through the silent church. You've been preaching about family today, about the bonds between parent and child, about truth and honesty before God. I walked toward the altar, toward where he stood. I'd like you to finish your sermon with this. I held out the envelope. He looked at it, then at me, then at my mother, who had gone pale, all the color draining from her face. She knew what was in that envelope. She knew her carefully constructed life was about to crack wide open. Please don't, she whispered, but I heard it. Everyone heard it. And that whisper, that desperate plea, said more than any birth certificate ever could. Because why would she care what some random stranger was handing to the priest? Why would she plead if I was really no one to her? Father Michael took the envelope slowly. He opened it, pulled out the laminated document, and I watched his eyes scan the page. I watched his expression change from confusion to understanding to something like sadness. He looked at my mother, then at me, then back at the document. This is a birth certificate, he said quietly. For Marcus James Morrison, born April 15th, 1992. Mother listed as Rebecca and Morrison. He looked up at my mother. Rebecca, is this true? The church was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. Every eye was on my mother now. Some people were looking at the document, at Father Michael, but most were watching her, waiting to see what she would say, how she would respond. Would she keep lying? Would she double down? Or would she finally tell the truth? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. Her husband was staring at her with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock, definitely. Betrayal, maybe. Their children looked terrified, holding on to each other in confusion. She started, her voice barely audible. That was a long time ago. I finished for her. Yes, 32 years ago. When you were 17 and got pregnant and your parents sent you to live with your grandmother for a year so no one would know. When you gave birth to me and then went back to your regular life and pretended I didn't exist. When you left me with your grandmother and visited once a month at first, then once every few months, then barely at all. When you changed your name from Morrison to Richards after you graduated high school, so no one could trace you back to me. When you met Richard and told him you'd never been married, never had children, were starting fresh. When you had 2 more kids and gave them everything you never gave me. When your own mother died 3 years ago and you didn't even come to her funeral because you were afraid I'd be there. My voice cracked on that last part. I hadn't meant to say so much. I'd planned to let the document speak for itself, to stay calm and dignified. But 32 years of pain and rejection were pouring out of me now, and I couldn't stop it. You couldn't even come say goodbye to the woman who raised your son because you were more afraid of your secret getting out than you were sad about your own mother dying. I continued. Do you know what that feels like? To know your existence is so shameful to someone that they'd rather miss their own mother's funeral than risk acknowledging you. Tears were streaming down my face now, and I didn't care. Let them see. Let everyone see what her denial had done, what years of rejection and abandonment looked like. My mother was crying too, but I couldn't tell if it was genuine emotion or just the performance continuing the distressed victim routine. Richard had stepped away from her, standing there with his arms crossed, staring at her like he'd never seen her before. Their daughter was openly sobbing. Their son looked angry. Father Michael cleared his throat. "I think," he said carefully, "that we should continue this conversation in private. Marcus, Rebecca, perhaps you'd both join me in my office after the service concludes." "No," I said firmly. "No more private conversations. No more secrets." She denied me publicly, Father. In front of all these people, in front of God, she looked at her own son and said I didn't exist. So publicly is how this gets resolved. I'm not here to destroy her life. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because I'm tired of being erased. I'm tired of pretending I'm okay with being treated like I'm something shameful, something to hide. I exist. I'm her son, and I deserve to be acknowledged. The silence that followed felt eternal. Then, from somewhere in the middle pews, an elderly woman stood up. I recognized her vaguely from my grandmother's funeral, one of the few people who'd been there. "I knew your grandmother," she said to me, her voice kind. "Helen was a good woman. She talked about you all the time, about how proud she was of you. She also talked about Rebecca, about how it broke her heart that her daughter wouldn't acknowledge her grandson." She turned to my mother. "Shame on you, Rebecca. Your mother spent her final years heartbroken over your choices." Another person stood, then another. More people who'd known my grandmother, who remembered me as a child, who'd wondered what happened to Helen's grandson. The tide was turning. The community that my mother had worked so hard to impress, to fit into, to be accepted by, was seeing her now for what she really was. Father Michael held up his hands again. "Please, everyone, this is clearly a complex family situation with a lot of pain on all sides. Perhaps we should." "You're right, Father," my mother said suddenly, her voice loud and clear. Everyone turned to look at her. She was standing straight now, no longer crying, just looking tired and defeated. "You're right. There's a lot of pain, and most of it is my fault." She looked at me directly for the first time since I'd entered the church. Really looked at me, not through me or past me, but at me. "He's my son," she said. "Marcus is my son. I gave birth to him when I was 17 years old. I was terrified and ashamed, and I let my parents convince me that giving him to my grandmother to raise was the best option. And then I convinced myself that it was easier to just move on, to pretend it never happened, to build a new life where I wasn't the girl who got pregnant in high school. And I've been running from that choice ever since." She turned to Richard and the kids. "I should have told you. I should have been honest from the beginning. I was afraid you wouldn't want me if you knew. I was afraid you'd think less of me. So elite. I lied for years. And I'm sorry." And she looked back at me. "And I'm sorry to you, Marcus. You deserve better. You deserve a mother who is brave enough to acknowledge you, to be proud of you, to include you in her life. I failed you. I've been failing you for 32 years. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you anymore. But I want you to know that you're right to be angry. You're right to want acknowledgement. You're right about all of it." I didn't know what to say. I'd imagined this moment so many times, but I'd never imagined this response. I'd expected more denial, more excuses, more blame shifting. I hadn't expected this quiet, broken admission. "I don't need your apology," I finally said. "I just needed you to stop pretending I don't exist." She nodded slowly. "I understand." I turned to leave, my legs shaking, my whole body trembling with adrenaline and emotion. I'd done what I came to do. I'd forced the truth out. I got my acknowledgement, even if it didn't feel the way I thought it would. But then I felt a hand on my arm. I turned to find Father Michael looking at me with compassion in his eyes. "You're not leaving yet," he said gently. "You came here for acknowledgement, yes. But you also came here to a church, to a place of healing and redemption. You both did, whether you realized it or not. So before anyone goes anywhere, we're going to pray. And then we're going to talk all of us about what comes next. Because this story doesn't end with revelation. It ends with reconciliation, or at least the possibility of it. That's what family is supposed to mean. That's what church is for. I looked at my mother. She was watching me, waiting to see what I'd do. Her husband was still standing apart from her. Her children still looked shell-shocked, but she was looking at me with something that might have been hope. I thought about leaving. I thought about walking out that door with my validation and never looking back. I gotten what I came for, right? She'd admitted it. Everyone knew now. I could go back to my life and be done with her forever. But something Father Michael said stuck with me. This story doesn't end with revelation. Because he was right. I didn't just want acknowledgement. I want a family. I'd always wanted a family. And maybe, just maybe, there's still a chance for that. Okay, I said quietly. I'll stay. We didn't fix everything that day. How could we? You can't undo 32 years of damage in one afternoon. But we started. We sat in Father Michael's office, my mother and I, with Richard and the kids there too, and we talked. Really talked, maybe for the first time ever. She told me about being 17 and pregnant and scared. About parents who were more concerned with their reputation than their daughter's well-being. About feeling like she had to choose between her future and her son, and hating herself for choosing her future. About watching me grow up from a distance and wanting to be part of my life, but not knowing how, being too afraid of disrupting everything she'd built. I told her about feeling abandoned, about watching other kids with their mothers and wondering what was wrong with me that mine didn't want me. About my grandmother trying to fill that void, but always knowing it wasn't the same. About seeing her posts online, her perfect family, and feeling like I'd been replaced, like she decided I wasn't good enough for her new life. It wasn't easy. There were tears, accusations, defensiveness. Richard struggled with the betrayal of the lie. The kids struggled with suddenly having a brother they didn't know existed. I struggled with years of anger that didn't just disappear because of one apology. But it was a start. That was 6 months ago. Since then, we've been taking it slow. Coffee meetings once a month. Text messages on birthdays. Small steps towards something that might eventually look like a relationship. My half-siblings are curious about me now, asking questions, trying to figure out how I fit into their family story. Richard is cordial, still processing, but willing to try for his wife's sake and his kids' sake. And my mother? She's trying, really trying. She's in therapy, dealing with the shame and fear that made her deny me for so long. She's honest now, brutally, so sometimes, about how messed up her choices were, how much damage she did. She's introduced me to her friends, her extended family, as her son. It's awkward. Explanations are required, but she doesn't hide me anymore. I don't know if we'll ever have what other people might call a normal mother-son relationship. Too much time has passed. Too much hurt has accumulated. But we're building something. It's fragile and imperfect and requires constant work, but it's real. It's honest. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel like a secret. Sometimes I think about that Sunday morning in the church, about walking down that aisle with my birth certificate, about the moment she denied me, and I had to choose how to respond. People ask me if I regret it, if I wish I'd handled it differently, more privately. But I don't regret it, because sometimes the only way to break through years of silence and denial is with one undeniable truth, spoken loud enough that everyone has to hear it. For years, I begged her to acknowledge me in whispers, in private conversations, in letters she never answered. And nothing changed. But in the end, truth didn't need my voice, only proof. And once that proof was out there, once the lie was exposed, she had to choose, keep lying or finally be honest. She chose honesty. It took public humiliation to get there, and that's sad. But she chose it. And that choice, that acknowledgement in front of everyone who mattered to her, that's what finally set both of us free. I still carry that birth certificate with me sometimes. Not because I need proof anymore, but because it reminds me that I exist. That I've always existed. That no amount of denial or hiding or shame could change the fundamental truth of who I am. Marcus James Morrison, son of Rebecca and Morrison, whether she wanted to admit it or not. And now, finally, she does admit it. She admits me. She acknowledges me. And that's not everything I needed, but it's something. It's a beginning. And sometimes, When you've spent your whole life being erased, a beginning is more than enough. Speech Balloon, thank you for listening to my story. If this story resonated with you, if you know someone who's struggled with family denial or spent years seeking acknowledgement from a parent who wouldn't give it, please share this video. Sometimes people need to know they're not alone in their pain, that their feelings are valid, that they have every right to demand to be seen and acknowledged. Your support means everything to this channel. If you found value in this story, if it moved you or made you think differently about family dynamics and the courage it takes to demand truth, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories, and it lets me know that sharing these difficult, vulnerable experiences matters. And if you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. I share true stories from Reddit about family drama, personal growth, standing up for yourself, and the complicated relationships that shape our lives. Every story is told with the respect and depth it deserves, because these aren't just entertaining narratives, they're real people's lives, real pain, and real triumphs. Drop a comment below telling me what you think. Would you have done the same thing in my position? Have you ever had to force someone to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth? How do you navigate relationships built on lies or denial? I read every comment, and I love hearing your perspectives and your own stories. Remember, you exist. Your feelings are valid, and you deserve to be acknowledged by the people who brought you into this world. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Until next time, take care of yourselves and know that your truth matters, even when others try to deny it.